are back with something new. I am one of your hosts, Amber Solaris, and welcome to the first ever season of Reign of Pain, where we dive into the edges of desire, thrill of endurance, with the art of sadomasochism and pain-related play. So, this is your space to explore, educate, power. Whether you're a seasoned player or you're just beginning your journey into this form of play. So pain play isn't just about sensation, it's about that sense of trust and connection and really transformation. Every episode here will shed light on different techniques, different explorations, journey. Of course, we'll talk about the safety stuff and the inner worlds of people who embrace the sting, the thud, and the different sensations while they surrender to seeing stars. So step into the night and embrace the unknown and find your own version of the Reign of Pain. And of course, as always, a little bit of a content warning. This is listener discretion advised. There is a content warning for potentially distressing topics. We will be discussing a multitude of adult-only topics here, and so you are encouraged to consider your own capacity before continuing.
Hey, amazing humans, and we're back for season 4 of our amazing podcast. We're really excited. We have our full team behind us in the wings, and we're starting to promote some of our educators for Reign of Pain, our new event happening in February. We hope you guys are excited as we are, and we look forward to welcoming not only all our sadomasochists, but the amazing presenters that are going to be bringing us classes. So welcome back, and we hope you're ready for a crazy season. I have Evie Lupine in my dungeon with me today virtually, which is quite an honor. This incredible human has educated a huge amount of my local community, so it's a great honor to be sharing some space with her today. Welcome, Evie, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, we're super excited. I have my normal question that I ask everybody is, how did you stop being a muggle and find your way into this kinky universe that you explore so generously these days?
Yeah, that's a really fun way of phrasing it. So I got into the scene about almost 10 years ago now. It's been like 9.5 years. And, when I was younger, I always had kind of thoughts and fantasies about kink, but all the way through high school, I just thought, oh, that's like a fantasy you have in your head. You don't ever do it for real. You just talk about it, you read about it in books. That's where it lives, that's where it stays. No one does it in real life. And then when I started college, because I had grown up in not an extremely conservative, but a typically American conservative household where like sex was not an openly discussed topic. And I don't blame my parents for that. It's just, most parents at the best of times are not sure how to have those conversations with their kids. But for me, that kind of led me to not having any, knowledge about sexuality in general, even just from a muggle or a vanilla capacity. And I went on this journey like freshman year of college to learn about it. And as part of that exploration, I also discovered kink and BDSM, and I came across some information on social media about it, and I went, oh my gosh, people do this for real in real life. I can actually like do this with other human beings and not just read about it in a book or think about it in my head. That's amazing. And then I was very lucky because the university I went to, there was actually a kink community in that area, and I just sort of dove right in. I had gone through, I discovered kink while I was in, like a year long-ish, maybe a little bit less than that, vanilla relationship. We broke up. And then as soon as we broke up, I was like, I'm not going to hold myself back. I'm going to finally try this kink thing. And I made a FetLife account, and I found the local community. I went to I think maybe like one munch or something. I met some people that I knew that went to my same school as me, and we all went together to my first dungeon experience. And then after that, I never looked back. So that's sort of my entry point.
And what is the first kink that you experienced?
Pet play. Pet play was the big one. I had taken the BDSM test that I'm assuming most of the listeners are familiar with, but that's a very, very popular online quiz where they purport to tell you what your kinks are and like how intensely you're into them based on this very graded scale of like green meaning you're super into it and red meaning you're not into it at all. And I discovered primal through that was like my top result. And then while researching that, I had also come across pet play. So those were kind of the two things that really drew me into kink. But as far as practice goes, the first one was certainly pet play because that was getting popular on social media and it was popular with my age group. So, college age women, 18 to 22 is very popular with us. And I thought that would just be like really fun. I was always into imagination play when I was a kid. Like I loved getting to like pretend to be like an animal or like, characters from the Lion King or whatever. And I was like devastated when I got like too old to do that kind of imagination play. So when I got older, having that opportunity to go back to that and get to return to that point in my life in some ways of getting to have that open exploration, imagination, and just like judgment free fun was really fantastic.
And all the outfits that come with it. I don't know what I
Mm.
would do without all the we're with my partner and I quite into we have a latex pony play
Mm.
fetish, and I don't know what I'd do without it. Just the creation of the outfits is half the fun, and yeah, half the joy that we get out of it. My bank balance would probably appreciate me more if I didn't buy so much latex for that.
Mm.
But
Mhm.
um, we're talking about sadomasochism, and we're talking about pain. And I'm interested to find out which side of the sadomasochist range you sit and how you define that in your own life.
I have had a very tumultuous relationship with sadomasochism, I would say. When I was initially in the scene, I explored a fair bit of pain play with a partner I had because my first DS relationship was with someone who very much identified as a sadomasochist. And so, we experimented with all the kind of typical things, right? Like paddles and spanking and the like. And at the time, I didn't really have any pain processing skills that I do now. And that made it very difficult for me to find a way to enjoy it, especially because like I didn't at that time have a lot of education about subjects like pain processing or like what other people are experiencing when they're experiencing that kind of thing. And I would have experiences that did not live up to my partner's expectations. And then they would just go, oh, well, like you're not into that. That didn't go particularly well. We're never going to do it again. And so there was a lot of anxiety over like, oh crap, I need to have this like very proper reaction that they're expecting. Otherwise, this thing's going to get cut off forever and I'm never going to get to try it again. And that actually made my relationship to pain even worse, like in terms of finding a way to be able to enjoy it because there was this other level of pressure in the relationship to have a certain experience of it. And so for a long time, I did not identify as a masochist at all. Like probably the first 6, 7 years I was in the BDSM community, I would never ever use the term masochist for me. Also because I had a lot of friends in the scene at the time that I would consider to be like big masochists, where that was like their primary initial motivation in kink. Whereas for me, it was more like power exchange, pet play, primal play, that kind of wheelhouse of things. But over the last couple of years, as I've especially leaned more into the primal play element of what I'm into and learning more about pain processing and really honing in on the types of pain that I enjoy specifically and kind of like being real about the fact that like no, I don't necessarily enjoy all types of pain, but for the types that I do enjoy it quite intensely. And so that is something that I can own as a label when I feel like it, though I may not necessarily advertise that as such, right? Like I'm not going up to people and saying like I'm a masochist as a label typically. But for me, masochism is the enjoyment of intense sensation. And I find that that's like I like using that both as like a personal descriptor and like generally is what I'll say, or some version of that is what I will say in a class I'm teaching about how I see what pain is, because I think people can get kind of in their heads about like what counts as being pain. Like, does it have to be physical? What about if it's emotional? What if it's not a certain like type of implement that people like would associate with kink? And I just try to make it as open-ended as possible for those different experiences. However, the first thing that I knew before I was a masochist was actually that I was a sadist. And I knew this because one of my favorite things to do is to come up with terrible scene ideas. I am like the terrible idea person. My kink persona on my sadist side is I like being the evil assistant. I like whispering in the ear as like an advisor to be like, but have you thought about doing this awful idea that they definitely would hate? And then, like, getting to see that play out and, like, help that experience happen. It's satisfying for me both on a creative level and then also getting to see other people in pain and suffering, but also kind of feeds my service side and my submissive side at the same time, playing in that kind of more assistant role as opposed to the main perpetrator, maybe, let's say. And on the flip side from masochism, like I would consider sadism to be the enjoyment of having other people receive intense sensations from you, whether that be emotional or physical or like. But my sadist side, I don't usually like to say that I'm a switch. I don't really resonate with that term because I feel like my sadist side is kind of always there, and my masochism is kind of always there. Like I don't really flip between them in the way that I feel like switch sometimes implies. So usually I'll say like sadomasochism as a compound term, or I'll just like say one or the other based on what's relevant for the conversation I'm having at the time, or maybe what I'm negotiating.
Love that. You brought up some interesting topics in what you just said, and then one of the things I think resonates with me so much is this idea that you have to be able to experience the ultimate extreme pain to be able to be classified as a masochist.
Hmm.
And it's almost a social pressure
Yeah.
to show up in a certain way with a certain level of bruising and a certain level of marks to be able to associate yourself with that role. And
Hmm.
I think that we need to take that pressure away, because I think everybody processes pain differently, exactly like you've just been speaking about. But you know, everybody's perception of pain is totally different. I play a lot with body art and sharp things. And it's really interesting because pain becomes 3D in that, because it's
Mm.
a reflection of somebody else's emotional view on the situation and their own experience to what they can tolerate or have been through, or and yeah, so I really think we need to just or I would have liked to have known as a baby Kinkster that it was okay not to have a million bruises and still to be able to enjoy pain, and that being a masochist didn't mean I needed to enjoy every level of extreme torture. I just needed to enjoy intense sensations. So I really like the way you put that. I think that is a great way to introduce it to new masochists and to people exploring pain for the first time, because pain is incredibly beautiful and incredibly close to pleasure for me, especially. So what advice do you have for new masochists, or for your past self? If you
Mm.
could have given yourself some advice when you started your masochist journey.
I think the number one thing, which is also probably hard to put in practice as much as it's a cliche, is like to not hold yourself up to anybody else's standards. Like even your partner's standards. Like if you have a partner that's like kind of pressuring you or even denigrating you for, not being able to mark the way that other partners have marked, or not having the exact kind of reaction they expect. Like I think it's fair for people to have their own desires and things that they like feedback wise from people, but it can definitely easily get to a point where, as I experience, like there's this pressure to relate to masochism in a certain way that can actually impede you finding your own natural experience. And I would say the advice I would give myself is to just keep trying different things. And I was very lucky in that I had so many opportunities early on to play with more experienced people that had more extensive toy bags, or that could take me to classes or take me to conventions that, I didn't even know existed until they told me about them. And they could kind of help guide me and give me examples of like, okay, here's not just what a paddle or spanking feels like, but here's a whip, here's clamps, here's needles, here's all these different things. And within that, there might be like one or two things that you find that really work for you. And it's okay that it's not even that it's just those things. Like you found your secret sauce. Like that's the thing that works for you. Like stick in it. That's okay. There are masochists that, and I've known them who like kind of every sensation as long as it's really intense. But for most people, they're going to have preferences, and that's okay that that's your preference, whether it's like a baseball bat or needles, or a baseball bat over needles, maybe for some people, right? But it doesn't have to be that way. If you just like a firm hand spanking and you like your ass getting a little red and you don't really mark up beyond that, that's also totally okay. And I think I'm not sure what the solution is for our community to move past this visual fixation on these signs of sadomasochism, like these bruises and welts and this and that. Not only because like it pressures people to play to a certain level of intensity, but because it's also something that like not everyone of every skin tone is going to mark the same way. Like I am extremely pale. I'm somebody who marks fairly easily at this point in my life, especially because I know the kinds of play that allowed me to mark easily versus others. But there's some people that have a very different skin texture, very different skin tone than me, and like they're not going to mark the same way. But they're not less of a masochist because they don't have the same like purple bruises that I do. And I think we need to maybe have that a little bit more in our heads. When we're thinking about these uh, random, out of nowhere the pillars of kink that we're putting on people that they're supposed to be able to be on. And yeah, just it feels cliche to just say like don't let other people's experiences dictate what yours should look like, but that is something that I've really focused on in my own kink journey in the last couple of years, is just owning whatever my own experience is, opting in to find the people who resonate with that, and, like, not worrying about the, like, 9 out of 10 people that I'm not going to be able to play with because, like, we don't have the same perspective on kink, we don't have the same goals, and it's about finding those little gems where it does really work and not all the rocks where it doesn't work, right?
I love that. And we teach we teach a very basic impact class, and one of the first things we do is we blindfold partner A and get them to spank partner B, and then feel what the skin feels like after a hand spanking. So feel the goosebumps and feel the raised and feel the warmth, instead of identifying the result of the spanking by the color. And I think that's huge because, skin as a canvas has such an incredible way of reacting. It has so many different ways of talking to you. Its voice is very loud, and it's not just in its color reaction. It reacts a million different ways in heat and texture and just the way it feels underneath your hand. And I think it's so important that we're encouraging our tops to look for that and to look for the experience that the bottom is feeling, rather than the visual sunset of bruises on the bum. Because I don't bruise very easily, and I heal super quickly, which is great, but has been frustrating in my journey because a lot of the times has meant that I haven't, when I started off, the tops would go harder and go faster and go for longer just to get a better result. And it wasn't about what was happening to me as a bottom. So I really try and teach it in a way that the top is feeling what the bottom is feeling, and in touch with what their action is causing. But I love what you're saying about different skin tones and not concentrating on the bruising, because I think that's huge, hugely important. We talk a little bit about some common misconceptions in sadomasochism. Is there anything that comes up regularly for you? Do you teach a lot of this, and you see a lot of different communities and a lot of different people?
Yeah, I probably the most popular class that I teach regularly is pain play for the non-masochist, because that's kind of what my experience has been, right? And having to, maybe own these days that I'm not just a non-masochist, I am also a masochist in a lot of ways, even if I feel like I'm not like always allowed to own that label because of the things we've talked about in terms of, marking or the variety of pain that I do or don't like. But, there's always misconceptions, and it sort of depends on kinda where in the community you're talking to. Certainly with new people, that are first getting into things, I find that there's a lot of misconceptions about the kinds of things that are relatively risky, right? And the kinds of things that they're afraid of doing versus what, might actually cause harm. And that's a little bit outside my depth to really get into that, because that's more of like a hard skills, like what's the proper way to do a flogging kind of thing. But certainly there's a lot of misconceptions over, oh, that kind of thing seems like, for example, like punching, right? Like I find a lot of like newer people get very scared at the idea of that, because what they're thinking of is like a fist fight, right? They're like, oh my God, that sounds so intense. But when you're like punching somebody on the butt, it's kind of like just getting like an intense deep tissue massage. Like it actually doesn't have to be that. You don't have to like literally play act like you're beating the person up. It's just another tool that you can use for sensation. And when you get more into kinksters that are in the community and the misconceptions that end up coming out of that, I mean, there's still a lot of kind of like, health and safety misconceptions about where is dangerous or not to bruise and things like that. But I think the misconceptions there tend to have maybe more of a root in the mental experience, more on the sadist side, actually. I think a lot of people end up carrying a lot of misconceptions about sadists that like basically don't ever get addressed. Like even if we don't talk about it, I think there can be a mentality of like sadists are like like masochism, kind of universal sadists. Like they just want to do whatever will cause harm and pain. The more intense, the better. Sadists are always going to want to do more and more and more, harder and harder and harder. And like you as the S type have to put guardrails around that, because if you don't, then they're going to do whatever they want. And it's almost kind of talked about in this way that sadists don't have their own preferences or their own like personal boundaries. And I've been having a lot of conversations with people recently where like a lot of sadists feel kind of used by their masochistic partners, that their needs and wants are really respected, and they're just kind of being used for scenes, and not being respected as the autonomous human beings with emotions they are, and not just uh, pain dispenser machines essentially. And I'm I'm not quite sure yet what the solution to that is, but I think even just maybe offering people a second to pause and just like think, are you really seeing your partner as a whole person when you're negotiating with people, when you're talking to sadists, when you're talking to potential play partners? Are you just talking about the things that you want to have happen to your body and the kinds of sensations you want to experience? Are you inviting them in to talk about the emotions they want to experience, what their boundaries are, what their limits are? I have had a shocking number of tops and sadists tell me that I am the first person to ever ask them about what their boundaries are, or like what their limits are, or what they need for aftercare. And this isn't to blame S types for not having those conversations. I think the reason they don't happen is because people don't talk about doing that. But it is something I think that we could make a huge improvement on and give people better scenes over, if we could kind of fight that mental misconception of, sadists kind of just wanting to, play more intensely for their own sake because they're horrible monsters. Or like what you talked about with, people wanting to get more marks out of you, so they're going harder and faster. But I think there's also pressure among sadists between each other to be the kind of sadist who can take a person farther, who can play harder with them. And I've seen sadists that if they have a partner who plays harder with somebody else than them, like that also kind of hurts their feelings a little bit. They're like, well, why can't I get you to that place? So there's also this like sadist to sadist competition that happens as well, that I think, impedes communication, and impedes a lot of things I think actually would make people's scenes better if we could just kind of build a bridge and get over it.
Yeah, I love that. And I think in our sharps community we're quite pressured to produce this perfection. And we often lose the intent in the process. And we're so worried about the beautiful pattern being perfect, that we are losing the idea that it's actually a 2-hour experience between two people, and that is what matters. So just reiterating what you said, and just adding to that and saying, intent is everything. So aligning that intent and really focusing on what both of you want out of it, emotionally and physically, and both partners. Because when I am in my sadist role, I am most pleased when I'm pleasing my masochist by giving them the pain that they want, and also ticking my own boxes. I got super fussy in my old age, I just don't do a whole lot of stuff anymore because it doesn't tick my box. And it's easier, I think, when you get a bit older, because that boundary is a bit clearer. But just making sure that the intent is aligned. And I think once you've aligned the intent, it really makes a big difference to the process that's happening underneath you. But yeah. And also this comparison in our community needs to stop. I see it so much in the shop side where, you know, we appreciate the work because it's perfect. But did the work have the same personal side or personal interaction, and was the intent the same as a messy piece that isn't as close to perfection? And I
Yeah,
think that practice should make personal and not perfect these days. But anyway,
that is.
my
I would love to have that on a t-shirt. That would be great.
that's actually from a Dutch educator called Dee Moon. She really made me look hard at my perfection. So I've been working a bit on that. You can hear that. Um, the sadomasochism for me, or pain for me, has been a journey of self-discovery, and for me it's been very empowering. It's taught me to care for myself. It's taught me to look after
Mm.
myself. Obviously, I want to push myself harder. I have to be show up ethically, and part of showing up ethically for me is having capacity, being fit, being in the right frame of mind, and being physically able to endure what I'm asking my top to do. Is this something that you have found empowering in pain play?
Yeah, I mean, I think for myself, because it was such a long journey to get to the point where I could identify in that spectrum, I think on the one side, kind of owning more of the sadist side of who I am, that gave me a sense of power in my play that I like wasn't used to having, especially coming more from the submissive side of like the fact that I'm allowed to have like these very diverse desires, and that's okay, and I'm still a worthwhile person, and I'm still somebody who's desirable and interesting and good, honestly. Like I think a lot of people who are sadistically inclined struggle a lot with like guilt and shame around their desires because they connect it without even thinking about it to being like a bad person, to being dangerous, to being somebody who is like unworthy of love or relationships because they have these like dark things inside them that they, shouldn't have. And masochists also experience that, but I think it's a little bit easier from the opposite side to cope with that. Whereas embracing the fact that I have a sadist side and that I enjoy, you know, elements of people suffering because of ideas that I've had or things that I'm doing just gave me a level of confidence in myself and helped kind of wash away that guilt and shame that I wasn't even realizing was there. And with masochism, there's definitely a lot of like body confidence that comes with that, like in the sense that I know that I am capable of enduring more than I thought I was. Like when I was younger, I was, like, terrified of getting shots. I wasn't, like, afraid of the needle, I was afraid of the pain that I was going to experience and, like, how bad is it gonna be? Am I gonna be able to handle it? Like, to the point where my mom would have to go to the pharmacy and, like, get a numbing patch for me to wear before I would get shots, that way I wouldn't freak out as much. But through embracing masochism, I have been able to overcome so many of, like, the phobias and fears in my life, like, I go in for like an STI panel and I have to get my blood drawn for a very long amount of time and I'm just chatting away with the phlebotomist and the assistant and I'm, talking about my day and like I'm not worried about like getting shots anymore, getting vaccines, any of that stuff. I just like, oh, this is nothing. I know that I can totally handle this. Or if I have to go through, something really painful like I'm not sure what a good example of that would be. I think the thing I tend to go back to is that like I had a medical event that was like quite painful about like 6 months ago. And I think if I had experienced that medical event without kind of my skills in masochism and the self confidence of being able to endure like intense amount of pains for a long amount of time, it would have been a lot more difficult. But because I'm like, okay, I can get through this. I know this is not going to kill me. This is just very uncomfortable. But I know that I can cope with that. And that was really, really good to have. Not that I like enjoyed the medical pain I was experiencing, but just that I knew that it was something I was capable of enduring, and it kind of corrected this self-image I had of myself as like a weak person, basically. I had a lot of direct evidence now to counter that narrative I had about myself and know that it wasn't true.
I love that, and I think that the medical professionals in your area really appreciate your kink journey, because it's so much easier to treat somebody when they're not fearful of the situation. But I also
Mhm.
I think for me, just understanding how to process the pain and understanding that I am capable of processing the pain and having a way to do that has helped me. And I fall off my horse a lot. So
Mhm.
having a way of being able to process the pain and knowing that there is an end to it Kink has helped me in that with that a lot. And I know that the medical professionals, especially my dentist, is really grateful for my kink journey, even if he doesn't know it, because I can now sit in
Mhm.
his chair without being in absolute pain in his
Mhm.
practice and needing to be highly medicated.
Mhm.
Yeah, so it's so interesting how it crosses over into real life and really gives you life skills. And
Mhm.
it's something that I definitely wouldn't change. Um, um, so how can we encourage practicing sadomasochism to be empowering, while still navigating the stigma that that it is abuse or it is um, I don't know how to put that. Maybe that wasn't the right way to ask that question. Um, Let me come back to that. Let me think about that. So how can we practice sadomasochism to be empowering while still navigating the stigmas around sadomasochism that exist?
Yeah, I mean, I think people tend to go back to consent as an important aspect of that, right? Of just like reinforcing to yourself that like this is consensual, both people want it. And I think that that's a good place to start from. But these days, I tend to focus not just on consent in and of itself, and that's still very important. That should be part of the baseline, but fun and joy and enjoyment that you get out of play, insofar as like you do that in a way that makes sense to you, because sadomasochism can be very mentally complicated, and, like, the way that you might be enjoying something, air quotes, is probably not going to look like enjoyment to an outside third party, but that's okay. It's about, are you internally getting the experience that you wanna have and being very in tune with yourself and your motivations for what you're doing? Like, what are the reasons for why you're doing this experience? How does this make you feel about your partner? How does this make you feel about yourself? And being willing to look at that in a brutally honest way, and maybe choosing to not do the things that lead to more harm or more negative opinions about yourself or your partner, and leaning into the things that do bring you joy and that do bring you pleasure. Like, let's say, for example, you are doing some activity with your partner and they bring out a whip and they use it on you, and you have like a terrible like mental experience of it, but whips look so cool and it's so impressive to do in a dungeon. Well, don't keep doing the whips if it makes you feel terrible. Like, maybe practice it in private a little bit. Maybe you can work on trying to develop a more positive relationship to it. But if that doesn't work for you, like, don't hold on onto it. Move on to something else that does work for you and that does bring you that joy and that pleasure, and just kind of emphasizing that side of the experience, I think, can be really helpful. Or it can all, like, especially kind of getting more into the sharp side of things and like needle designs, like that artistic creative fulfillment can also be really important too. And it's difficult to not have those outside expectations or opinions of, kink being this like terrible, horrible thing. That does leak into the way that we think about things sometimes. But I think through exposure and through experience and through very intentionally reminding yourself of like, I'm here because I like this. I'm in full control of what's happening. I can end this at any time. And ultimately this makes me feel better about myself and my life and my partners and everything. And like, why wouldn't I keep doing it? Like, no one else gets to choose what my experience is in my life except for myself.
I love that, and I think also just giving yourself time to process in between
Mhm.
play, and I see a lot of people rushing into the dungeon as newbies and trying everything all in one go, and then needing a year to unpack that, and that unpacking being hard. So my advice is always like, it's not the Olympics, and even if it
Yeah.
was the Olympics, you can't do every sport in one day. So
Yeah.
start small and build it up slowly, and like there's no medal, you're not going to win anything, and this is literally your fantasy and you're doing it for yourself. You've mentioned some great stuff. The one thing I wanted to touch on before you close, because I think it's important to you and it resonates so much with me, is the creativity that we can bring into sadism, and it doesn't have to be this old school textbook. It can be if that's your fantasy. I'm not judging that, but that there's so many ways to explore it, and to bring a creative side into play. And I think that's something that you find equally as encouraging.
Mm.
Do you
Yeah,
want
I
to tell
think
me?
creativity. Oh, go ahead.
No, sorry, carry on.
Oh, I was just gonna say, kind of, springboarding on that idea of like creativity being really important. I think, creativity runs the gamut. That does also include like having fun with those more conventional scenes you typically see in a dungeon, right? But I think it's about not getting stuck into the boxes of like what you think is possible. Like, for example, Midori has a class that she teaches, really all of her classes, but I visually remember seeing this the most in her class about vlogging. And she'll do like an example scene, and she'll not just like the traditional way of doing it, which is you're on a cross and you're standing there in one position, and like you're maybe switching up what floggers you're using, but it's very rhythmic. It's expected after a while how that exact scene is going to play out. But she's moving, her bottom's moving, they're kind of dancing, they're kind of going in circles around each other, and there's a lot more of a almost a performance, like a performance art element to that. That I think when people see it, like I can see their eyes light up and go like, "Whoa, I didn't even think that you could do that." And I think it offers an alternate route as opposed to just escalating more intense, harder, longer scenes. Do the scenes that you're doing differently. Play like think of creative ways that you can play with these sensations you're already using, like not just being stationary, like the costuming that you're wearing while you're doing it, the role play elements you're bringing in, if you like that. And I think that will help your kink journey not stagnate. And also, secondarily, it has the benefit if you're an exhibitionist and you like people appreciating the stuff that you're doing, if you're doing different stuff than other people in the dungeon, obviously within the rules of the dungeon, like that's going to catch people's eyes and they're going to like that. That's going to make you feel better because you're getting your exhibitionist side fed as well. So there's multiple benefits happening there.
Yeah, no, I always advise my yeah, we've got quite a newbie group of Kingsters in our area, and I always advise them with impact that impact doesn't have to be over daddy's knee in the bedroom. It can be with the frying pan in the kitchen, and that can be just
Mm-hmm.
as much fun. It doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be just because it's been prescribed in one way. It doesn't mean that you have to take it home and you have to relive somebody else's fantasy. This is always about you. So yeah, I love chatting to you. If my listeners want to reach out and get to know you better and see more of your classes, where can they find you? Can you give us some of your social media links?
Yeah, so I am Evie Lupine, Evielupine. More or less everywhere. I am on Twitter. My main social media platform is YouTube, and I post YouTube videos talking about BDSM, the kink community, relationship advice, polyamory, and things along those lines. I also talk about queer issues and stuff as well. And if you want kind of the spicier content I can't put on YouTube, it's on my Patreon, which is also Evie Lupine. If you're ever wondering where I am, I'm pretty much Evie Lupine everywhere. I am technically on Instagram under that name as well, Evie.Lupine. I don't post on there too much because I'm constantly anxious about getting my account deleted, but I'm mostly on Twitter, mostly on YouTube. That's the best place to find me.
That's amazing. And I know that you have some classes available on a platform. Where can they find your
Yeah.
classes?
Yes. Thank you for reminding me. I almost forgot. I now host content on Gumroad. So I believe that is let me, if you give me a second, I can find the actual, if it's, yes, evielupine.gumroad.com. I have several recordings of classes on there, and they're pay what you want. If you want to pay me $10 for a class, that's great. If you want to pay me like $5, that's great. I think the floor is like $5, but they're 2 to 3 hours recordings of classes, including my pain play for the non-masochist class and a couple others on service, power exchange, and one on pet play as well. I'm actually going to be re-recording these when I do new classes in the coming year, just updated versions of them. So if you pay for them now, I will email you a new link to the new recorded version of these classes so you can have both the old and the new one if you like. You're not going to miss out on the newer content if you buy one of my recorded classes now. But I'm always tweaking things with my classes. I'm always adding new slides or rephrasing things. So I try to make sure people get the best, most accurate information that I can give them.
Amazing, and we're really excited to have 2 of your classes coming to Reign of Pain, and we're really excited for Reign of Pain. So thank you for joining us, and we can't wait to host you there.
Yes, I'm excited to be there. And one of the classes I'm going to be teaching is a brand new class I've never taught before about primal play. I had a brain blast moment one day where I was like, oh my God, I know how to talk about primal play now. I figured it out. Because I found that it's very difficult to talk about, and people kind of talk in circles about it. I think I found a way to finally put it down on paper and help people understand it a little better. And I'm super excited about teaching that one. But pain play for the non-masochist is also a favorite. So really, you're getting all the best stuff from me at this event.
Evie, we've loved having you, and we can't wait to host you. Thank you again, and to all my listeners, if you haven't seen it, Reign of Pain is up. The tickets are selling. We have an early bird discount until the end of December. If you need something to get you over January, then book this con for February, and let us excite your 2025 in the most painful ways. We have scholarship tickets available, and we have a full scholarship for any of our BIPOC listeners. If you need any of that, drop us a DM. We're happy to help you. We believe that education should be for everybody, and we're always happy to make a plan. So please reach out to our team. And thank you for listening, and thank you for 4 seasons, and for helping me kick this one off. And from my dungeon in Cape Town to you, wherever you are, lots of love and kitten kisses.